and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. A fourth defeat on the bounce for the Texans, but they're sitting pretty in the draft order. But this week, join us a returning guest from ESPN Radio 97.5, Mr. Cody Stoots. Cody, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right, yeah. I'm doing all right. Well, I'll be honest, I turned it off on Sunday, about sort of halfway through the first quarter, and then kind of went back to it a bit later on. But yeah, it's
that makes sense. That was a worthwhile spot to turn it off. Didn't get a first down to the second quarter, so yeah, that was a good spot to turn it off.
Yeah, Anyway, I think we would have to give since we recorded, Houston Astros have become champions of baseball. How was that weekend for you? A bit of positivity to kick us off. How did you enjoy the whole? I was there the last time they won it, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. Everybody was just in a great mood. Every bar you went into, it's busy, but just one big party. How did you experience that weekend? What did you do, and how was it?
It's fantastic. It was a great mood, and it felt a little bit different than 17. I've been telling people, look, 2017, that's your first. You'll always remember that one. Just because it was your first doesn't mean it was the best. This one feels pretty damn good, and I really enjoyed it and have spent far too much on celebrating, from a celebrating in the moment situation to all the different things that you buy after a championship. So maybe 50 years from now, I'll be able to celebrate the same way with the Texans.
Yeah. Well, why I always reference back to that moment is because I think this, like, when you see like a city come together like that and like celebrate something they waited so long for, it's so special, and only really sports can do that. But this football team seems a hell of a long way from that right now. How have you been coping this season? What was your kind of setup Sunday? You hide behind the sofa, or you drinking heavily, or what you do?
I just try to eat something extremely delicious during the game, so that I can be like, wow, like I can identify really good memories with the game, but it's based off the food, not necessarily what I see. And then from an individual in-game perspective, I know what the end result's going to be. It's kind of like, did you watch Game of Thrones, or do you watch Game of Thrones?
No, not really. No, a little bit.
Well, you don't have to watch it to understand this analogy. So Game of Thrones, the show happened. It's finished. And then they're doing a prequel on HBO now that takes place like a few hundred years before the Game of Thrones story. It's called House of Dragon. Well, Game of Thrones did a good job explaining what was going to happen in House of Dragon. I know what the end result of House of Dragon is, but I can be interested on how it all got there. I know what the end result is most every Sunday, but I can be interested on how it got there. That's kind of how I look at each game. Is like, I know what the final score is going to be when 60 minutes of football is done, but what in that game catches my attention? What in that game can I hear from a conversation standpoint? Because sometimes these announcers give out little tidbits, give out little pieces of info that maybe the team wouldn't give local media, or they would only give to TV people in like a TV interview setting. So just kind of pick up little things like that. And I mean, it's tough for this team. If this team is one of those teams that's dictating your mood over the course of the week, you're not having a very good winter or fall.
Yeah. I think I've just become apathetic to it now. It's kind of got, and I don't know why. I just hit a point in the last couple of weeks, because I think last season it was in many ways worse, but I didn't at any point feel this. I don't know if it's just the continual losing, and you don't mind losing at times in this setting, I think, and it's kind of teeing up quite well for the first overall pick, and I think hopefully it goes that way, because I mean the results certainly went our way on Sunday.
The part for me that's tough is I expected them to be better. I expected the team to be better. I expected the team to have more cohesiveness. I was excited for Davis Mills when the season was going to get started. I thought of all the different options they could go, Mills was the right choice, and it became very clear very early on that he was not going to make a genius out of Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans for drafting him and keeping him around. So that was tough. You've seen some rookies hit some rookie walls. That's been tough to deal with. And so I had higher expectations than what they're achieving. And look, I love the NFL draft. It's one of my favorite things about football. I love it when the Texans are good. I love it when the Texans are bad. I love the NFL draft. I'm over the moon that we may be talking about 2 top 10 picks. But all that's January, February, March, and April. I'm sitting here in November and I got to watch bad football every week. That's not fun. I understand. Like, look, I enjoy the draft. I love the draft. But getting to the draft with this football team has become difficult.
Yeah, and it is about that, and you don't want to talk about it too much, but yeah, it so very quickly became about the draft, and we'll come on a couple of stuff. You picked up some good points here. We'll pick up on it. But the leading into the game on Sunday, there was the whole debacle, or some more information certainly when we recorded last Friday after the Eagles Thursday night football. It certainly seemed like there was more information out there. There was sort of certain media people putting out there the package that they turned round. Apparently they were getting really close trying to rework the deal, etc. What was your whole understanding of it? Because my overriding reflection is it's another situation that Caserio hasn't handled well, and I think it should. When you see where this team is right now, if there was a second pick for anybody on the table, I don't think they should be here right now.
The tough part is, if the money was the big holdup, is reworking Brandon Cooks' contract. If that was indeed the big holdup, what do you think you're going to do this offseason when you trade Brandon Cooks? You're going to eat some of the money. Yeah. So why not eat some of the money and get a better pick and know where that – because you know this as well as I do. When you don't know where the pick is, when you don't know where the selection is in the draft, it is easier to get that pick than to get the pick after you know exactly where the pick is. So if it was indeed the Dallas Cowboys, it was much easier for them to trade you the second round pick that they had than, say, this offseason when the Cowboys have the 50-something pick. Like, it becomes more difficult to get what you were going to get for Brandon Cooks by making the deal in the offseason. And, oh, by the way, you're still going to eat some of the money. It seemingly turned into a bad contract overnight. I liked the contract at the time. I also thought Brandon Cooks was along for the ride and was in. Like, he wanted to be here. Like, he wanted to be the veteran wide receiver for this team, no matter who the quarterback was. It's clearly Cooks doesn't want that. So the contract has turned very sour very quickly. You're still going to eat some of the money. Why not eat the money now? Get the second round pick for sure, maybe a little bit more. I know there's a rumor of maybe a fourth added on there or something like that, but get the pick now. I don't believe they're going to get a second round pick for him this offseason. I believe they'll trade him. I don't believe they're getting a second round pick for him. And we're going to sit here and lament the, 20 to 30 draft spots that they missed by not making the deal earlier.
Yeah. I find it, I found it really tough to swallow the more I heard about it over the week. And, I'm consistent, and I desperately want to be convinced by Nick Caserio, but I'm not there yet. And I think this is just another example of it, as you said, the value's only going to go down. The second round is the ultimate sweet spot in the draft. There's so much value there. Every year you get good players, good quality starter level types in that range. And even if it was a third on its own with eating some dead money, you did that with Bradley Roby, over a year ago to eat $8 or $9 million. We're the king of the dead cap, continue to be, and we've got probably another 12 months before the whole situation clears up. So in this climate, when he's dropping passes, quite clearly not engaged, body language is not there, stripped to the captaincy, it was the best solution for everybody, and I can't believe for a second we're not up for wasting money, because that's all, we've done that for a long time now.
The way I looked at it too is like, wouldn't you pay $10 million for a second round pick, or however much it was, if it's $10, $15 million? If I was an owner or general manager, I'd write a check for $10 or $15 million in dead money every year to have an additional second round pick. Like, I would have happily ate most of the contract to make sure I got that second round pick. Like, I would write a check every year with my dead money to go get a pick. That's kind of what I looked at it like, because this guy is not going to be on the team next year unless something drastically changes or he has a change of heart, which I don't see that happening. This guy's not going to be on the team next year.
Well, that's it. Particularly the way he's playing as well. There's absolutely no framing of somebody being worth the second round pick. You got at a time where you had leverage against a team that needed another asset, and now it looks like they might go and sign Odell Beckham or something. But yeah, just for me, Corey, just another in a series of perhaps mismanagement of situations, or not getting the optimum outcome for a team that needs every single little bit of help it can get if it's going to build back in a timely manner. Because yeah,
it's something I say about the team on Sundays, and it's going to be the case for a couple of years, and has been the case for a couple of years. The Texans live in the margins on Sundays. Yeah. Any small mistake is something that's potentially catastrophic for them during a game. Like one turnover can be catastrophic. One, errant pass. Like they need so many things to go right for them to win a football game that they live in the margins. They're almost that way off the field too. Now, that's not just for having it all work, but having it work in a timely manner. Nick Caserio really has to maximize all the opportunities, and it doesn't quite feel like he's maximized all the opportunities. So they live in the margins on and off the field, and Caserio has got to maximize these opportunities a bit better.
Yeah, and I think right from the Sean trade to, your first big contract given out, to a draft class where you spent future years to get the only guy that's looking like a serviceable starter. That I think it's not the best picture, and I think you need to build momentum in terms of a talent base, and I think that's the struggle. And I think, Cody, do you put it just down to just simply a lack of talent, and that's why the margins for this team are so paper thin at times?
I'd love to tell you it's a total lack of talent, but and I talked with this in a post game yesterday with Landry Locker. Give Brian Daboll the Texans, give Lovie Smith the Giants. Who wins yesterday? Brian Daboll would have coached the crap out of the Texans, and they probably would have won. Lovie's coaching staff and Lovie have disappointed this year. Big disappointment. I mean, expected more. There's an infusion of talent. There's an infusion of guys that they went to bat for to keep around that seemingly to me weren't any good at football last year, but this team should be much better. It really should. And I've been harping on this since the coaching staff kind of got announced. A lot of these coaches have coached in losing situations prior to arriving in Houston. A lot of these coaches have coached in places where winning has been hard to come by. I don't know that everybody knows how to coach up winners. I don't know that everybody knows how to coach up winners. And yesterday, from just a in-game execution standpoint, why is Lovie Smith running zone against this team? You got Steven Nelson, who's been fantastic as a free agent signing, one of the big wins for Nick Caserio. Derek Stingley is the third overall pick. The Giants have one of the worst wide receiver rooms in all of football. Why are you playing zone against them? Man these guys up. Let Stingley and Nelson go to work. And yeah, Saquon Barkley's going to beat you, but at least it's going to be Saquon Barkley beating you and not Daniel Jones hitting 60-yard passes to Darius Slayton. I mean, Daniel Jones had one of the easiest days of his life yesterday because he just attacked Lovie Smith's zone.
On the Slayton touchdown, they ran that same formation, but they just flipped it. So they had trips to the weak side. So that meant that Harris had to go and drop into coverage on the strong side to cover the tight end. They then run the three guys into the four guys in the zone, and they make them make a choice. And it happened twice in the game. It happened to I think it was the same. The receiver they picked up from Buffalo, forget his name, Hodges or something. They got a long gain just before the Barkley one ran it in on their third touchdown. But on both scores, or on the score and the play that led to the score, they just ran a simple formation whereby they overload the guys in there. They have to make decisions. They don't communicate well. They don't pass man on when they're moving in and out of each zone. And it's really that simple to just go and stress the communication, the discipline of how these guys play zone. It's that easy to beat them. And I think it's every week, Cody, and you're right. And I saw you tweet that yesterday about there's probably, and we probably don't have any mismatches really much of the season, but surely Stingley and Nelson versus those guys, Darius Slayton, etc., was the one thing you could go and exploit. Certainly wasn't up front. You saw they got pushed back all day. But even when you've got a strength on a team who has very little, if any, he's not able to leverage it and he's not able to adjust. And it's just every game, and it's when it's so blatantly obvious, it's quite tough because you're making a bad situation worse by being inflexible.
Like you want to go 2 weeks from now, you want to try to zone up the Dolphins because they're so talented and they have so many good pass catchers. Okay, be my guest. But yesterday, you should have manned up the Giants, put your best guys on their guys, and just tried to win that way. And instead, you got the typical soft, cushy zone. And Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka are really good coaches. I'd put Kafka in a conversation to be a head coach eventually with all those years with Andy Reid, and he jumps off the Reid train into being an OC and calls the plays, and he's been fantastic with Daniel Jones. Those guys are really good coaches. They're going to beat up a team that's not taking advantage of whatever little advantage they do have.
Yeah, and even on the play that set up the first touchdown to a tight end who I'd never heard of, the two safeties were about 10, 12 yard cushion off when Slayton got it, then missed tackles and stuff as well. So there was two big touchdowns or two big turnovers for the Texans at a time when they really needed a touchdown. What did you make of those two plays? And and hypothetically, if they do go and even put up 6 or 10 points, do you think they would have had a chance?
I give Dameon Pierce is so damn good at what he does. I'm giving him a pass on everything. So if Dameon Pierce makes a mistake, I'm going to just blame the other 10 guys on the field. I mean, that guy can do no wrong for me right now. I love Dameon Pierce. I think I tweet that every week during the game at some point. Like I literally love Dameon Pierce. He's one of the most fun things to watch in the recent history of the Texans. So I'm going to give him a break. That happens. Running backs fumble, certainly guys that are having to carry so much of the load and have to try to do so much with what they like the weight of the offense is on his shoulders. So there's a try to do too much scenario a couple of times that pops up with Pierce. And that one was just a good old fashioned got it knocked loose. Really disappointed to see Mills throw that interception right after he had a touchdown taken away. Like that's tough. I understand the spot you're in from a team and like where you are on the field and you feel confident about it. To just have those two plays back to back, to have one wiped off because of Kenyon Green's holding, and then to have the interception basically be the very next play, that's tough. That's sort of a explanation of the 2022 Texans.
Yeah, I thought on the fumble it had been coming. I think because there was the one in Jacksonville where he got ruled down and it was there was fractions in it. He coughed up a couple, so it's something he needs to clear up. But let's get these mistakes out of the way now in a point in the season, and if it helps the draft slate, then we'll take these rookie errors along the way. And I think Mills just got impatient. I think he did the same on Thursday Night Football. He missed a wide open Brevin Jordan, then he missed Aikens wide open against the Eagles. Then he was desperate to get a ball up the slot against the zone cover 2 they were in, and didn't do it. And then I think he was just desperate to get a score on the clock because they needed one. But yeah, it was just I think that's been a common theme as well of this team, of not able to adjust on defense, but on offense not be able to come up and give away the ball at a time where you need to at least hold on and kick a field goal. And I think as we're criticising Lovey on the defensive side of the ball, not being good enough, absolutely no doubt about that. But I think on the offensive side of the ball, I certainly wasn't cock a hoop with the Pep Hamilton hire. I think you remember his offense from Indy. People seem to have perhaps a warped perception. We're maybe seeing that come to roost now, but certainly I don't think it's his fault that Mills doesn't want to throw the ball down the field. And when we actually did it, when you look at their secondary, that was something to target and didn't really feel like they did that. But I think on the offensive side of the ball, they've just lacked cohesion and consistency and creativity at the right times. And I think it's just giving the ball away in spots where you're trying to drive and score. It just keeps happening every week.
There are some guys that can't be head coaches, much better offensive minds, offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators. Josh McDaniels is a great example of that. What's going on with the Raiders right now is an absolute joke. The guy's just better offensive mind and coordinator than he is head coach. Well, if that's true for some guys, they can't be head coaches because they're really good coordinators and that's where they're better suited. Why can't that be the case for Pep Hamilton? Pep Hamilton is just not a coordinator. He's a really good position coach or assistant coach. He's just not a coordinator. That's what this season has shown me with Pep Hamilton. He was getting a lot of praise for the success of a couple of different quarterbacks in the first year that he worked with them. Justin Herbert 2 years ago, Davis Mills a year ago. Pep's not a coordinator. That's what this year has shown me. Now, he's got time to prove me wrong. He's got time to improve on some things, but I'd have a very hard time turning over the 2023 offense to Pep Hamilton after what I've seen in 2022. It has been unimpressive. It's been unimaginative. It's been scared at different times to take shots. Like, at this point, you're a one-win football team. I know the guys on this team and the coaching staff want victories. They don't give a flying hoot about the draft. I know they want to win football games. So why are you throwing 5 yards short of the sticks on every 3rd and long? Like, what are you doing? Go out there and take a shot. Pep Hamilton is just, it seems like he's not coordinator worthy. And I would have a really hard time drafting a guy high in the draft and turning him over to Pep Hamilton for his first year in the National Football League.
Yeah, no, that could break somebody. I think that's the fear. I think because you've got points where you see, again, it's repetitive, and this season is repetitive, so buckle in, everybody. But we were running the ball well out of I formation. I must have wrote down about 5 or 6 tallies in that and against that setup, and just goes away from it. First downs with Damian Pierce 3 times when they lined up on the I formation through the B gap, and first downs just go away from it. And regardless of how good you are in getting a flow, getting a feel for the game and calling the right plays and making those adjustments, the fact that you come out and go 3 and out 3 times on the road after a longer week than you normally have, I think is inexcusable.
Yeah, that's to have the mini bye and to go out there and perpetrate that against the Giants defense. That's fine. This is not an amazing Giants football team. It's not an amazing Giants defense. It's a fine defense. To go out there and have that occur is really poor by the entire offensive unit.
Yeah, and you talked about the rookie wall earlier on, Cody. Do you have, and I think Kenyon Green at times, though, he was much better than he had been the 3 games prior, but 2 flags on him, quite a few slips in pass protection. And look, it was a mismatch in the middle with Williams and Dexter Lawrence, 2 guys who are probably underrated in league circles. There was a play on the second drive where you saw the blue line on the broadcast, and then where the line ended up after the point of attack and literally been driven 4 yards back on a 7-step drop into Mills, and it was a mismatch. But so you've got to take the context, but I've got a bit of concern about Kenyon Green at this stage. What's your views on Kenyon and just the kind of bit of drop of form in a little late?
Kenyon Green really needs a season as a pro, is what I've determined, and what I feel is really necessary for Kenyon Green. And what I mean is, Kenyon Green spent a lot of time in the offseason, interviews. Nobody was, hammering him with workout programs for football work. He was getting ready for the combine. That's not always football work. Kenyon Green, to me, if he's a big-time player, this next offseason is going to be a huge offseason for him. He's going to come back. He's going to have his body in better condition. He's going to be in better shape. He's going to be more in tune with what is necessary for a season of the NFL. And you got to think, with the Aggies, he played, 13 games? We're coming up on those 13 games right now. Like, he's going to have a lot more football under his belt this year, and then he's got to go and attack the offseason and just sort of change how he's put together. I'm not saying he needs to come back and be Tony Mandarich, okay, some workout freak, but change himself a little bit. Green has been very up and down, and I'm okay with an offensive lineman being up and down. The tough part for me is I'm always going to be constantly comparing Kenyon Green to a couple of guys that are woulda, coulda, shouldas in the draft. I think a lot about Jordan Davis and how bad this rushing defense is, that perhaps you could have drafted him. Nick Caserio mentioned they had an opportunity to continue to trade back from 15 to maybe the 20th area. At 20, could you have done something different than Kenyon Green? Maybe a George Karlaftis to help the edge a little bit. But at the same time, this guy's the best left guard this team has had since Wade Smith, when Wade Smith was going to the Pro Bowl between Dwayne Brown and Chris Myers all those years ago. So it's been a long time since they've had this level of potential and stability at left guard. So I like that aspect of it. I don't know what they would have done if they didn't have Kenyon Green. And so with that, and with that part of the conversation, I'm not in love with taking a guard in the first round, but it's sort of a bonus pick. The first round's more about Stingley. It's less about Green. You obviously want Green to succeed. And I feel like you're seeing, hopefully, a guy turn into a really solid piece for the future with the potential maybe to move past and jump past that solid conversation into good to really good eventually. So, yeah, I'm worried about him now, but I feel like I'm going to be more worried if this is the Kenyon Green we see a year from now. The offseason should do him wonders.
Yeah, and that's where he's probably at crossroads in his career. I think is he going to be like, that live up to that slate, or is he just going to be one of these guys that was picked high and kind of hangs around the league? And yeah, I just when he oversets at times and he kind of his shoulder, his pad level kind of gets away from him. He's kind of arched over. He gives me Suafilo vibes, dare I say it, at times in pass protection.
Oh, don't put Suafilo on him.
So,
is the X-Man still in the league? Is Suafilo still in the league?
I don't. He was at the Cincinnati, wasn't he, last year, the year before? I think he may be gone. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, more.
Oh, he is a free agent, unfortunately.
Yeah. So not surprised at that, but yeah, I think he's yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I hope it's fine. But one thing they said in the broadcast, staying on the offensive side of the ball, was Nico Collins' potential one wide receiver. Where do you see that? And he's missed time again, so it's stemmed his momentum in terms of being the player he can be. Do you think he's that good, or really do we need to be looking at a number one piece beyond him?
No, Nico's not a number one wide receiver, and if he's your number one wide receiver, you're a really bad football team, which is exactly what the scenario is right now. The positive for Nico Collins, the positive for the Nico Collins conversation, the arrow is finally pointed up or pointed in the right direction, and it's stayed that way. Like you've seen incremental little improvement from Nico over the course of this season. And so the arrow was supposed to be pointing up last year and in the offseason, like it's pointing up and it's staying that way. Like he's moving in the right direction. Nico Collins, if he's a number one wide receiver, I'll be shocked. However, if Nico Collins turns into a really nice number two wide receiver and you get a number one with him, that's a nice 1-2 tandem. Like imagine a young number one potential wide receiver, Nico Collins, the hopes of John Mechie, and then Dameon Pierce, and then if you could find a tight end perhaps in free agency, that's a nice core to start with if you have a young quarterback. Or, I suppose Caserio could chase a veteran. That's a nice core to start with. Again, Nico Collins has got to become a better number two wide receiver. The conversation I had earlier in the year is if he turns into poor man's Mike Williams, like I'm really ecstatic with what Nico Collins has been able to do. I don't believe he has the talent to turn into Mike Williams, but if he turns into poor man Mike Williams, where he's kind of got that big play threat, and then in inferior guys, he can have a big day against them. And then there's another wide receiver, a la Keenan Allen, to take a lot of the pressure off of him, allow him to get those big plays. That's what Nico's like. He can improve his stature as a number two wide receiver. I don't believe he was even a number two heading into this year. He just happened to be the Texans' number two. Yeah. So he's doing a good job cementing himself as a number two wide receiver. And that's a big positive for him because if that growth is there, it's not quite like the DK Metcalfs, the Deontay Johnsons, the Terry McLaurins, but he needed to showcase that this year so you felt confident that you didn't have to blow up the whole wide receiver room. You just need to go get a stud, a star in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, Nico's going to end up, it seems like, being a really nice number two option at the wide receiver spot.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's a tough one, isn't it? I think because he certainly shows flash like that touchdown on Sunday was great. It was exactly what you would have wanted, but at the same time, there's got to be more consistency and a better usage out of him as well, because this is a great platform to use him this year and see what he's got and perhaps overuse him. But just like Dameon Pierce gets too many snaps, fumbles it. It's kind of similar to not getting Dari on the field, and he has a nice third down conversion on that drive where you should have scored, and it's not necessarily the best utilization of weapons, but is Is asking people to watch Davis Mills in this offense for another year next year, is that too much to ask for the fan base?
You're damn straight it's too much. Yeah. Look, early part of the season, like that's the most likely outcome, I think, of the situation is young guy beats out Davis Mills. Mills will be on the team next year. Just be the backup. Just be the backup. And then, once his time with the Texans is over, Davis Mills will bounce around the NFL, getting that backup opportunities or things like that. You can't run that guy out there as a starting NFL quarterback next year. He's not a starting NFL quarterback. We found that out. We figured that out.
Yeah, I think as well, but I just keep going back to the fact that, and I know Lovey was asked a couple of times in the presser at the end of, would you think about making a change at quarterback? And the reality is they probably can't in any way which would improve the team. But just like kind of, how they've kind of mismanaged certain position groups on this roster, he was handed the role, arguably deserved it. Arguably, I would perhaps argue that he didn't deserve to be handed the role. But regardless if he deserved to be number one, there was no legitimate competition. One that could push him, and two that could develop him in any sort of great way. Allen's okay, but I don't think he's going to come in and win you games. He'll be relatively steady. So, yeah, I do think it's going to be too much. I think if you're feeling a sense of malaise right now or just kind of downtrodden by this season, I think to come back and run it back like the feeling that free agency had, like you touched on earlier, is going to be too much, definitely. Flipping over to the other side of the ball, Jalen Petrie benched. Certainly benched for a little bit. I didn't see any value in that. I certainly think Jonathan owns a bigger liability, and I think the only way he's going to get better at tackling is by keeping him out there. But Petrie's season, the missed tackles was certainly getting a lot of run, and there was a bit of focus on him.
I tweeted simply, "Et tu, Petrie?" I mean, it kind of felt like I couldn't believe Jalen Petrie, of all the people, had betrayed me on this defense. That missed tackle on Slayton. And then what the hell was Cashman doing? It looked like he was going to make the play, and then he just all of a sudden was out of the play. I've watched like 5 times. I can't explain why Blake Cashman didn't make that play on Slayton. That felt like a timeout. Not because they wanted to put him in timeout, but because it was the best thing for him to go into timeout. Here's what I mean. A guy like Petrie, he has those negative plays stack up for him. It feels like he could kind of be in one of those just like trying to do too much, trying to overcome and make up for some of the negative plays, try to do too much. That felt like a calm down. That felt like a get off the field, calm down, do what you're capable of doing. The guy was a heat-seeking missile to start the season. Like, he was fantastic early on in the season. That felt like a calm down moment. Just like grab him. You kind of grab him by the shoulder pads. Hey, calm down. Relax. Do what you're capable of doing. I'm not worried about Jalen Petrie long term. Rookie wall. Guys have figured out how to attack him. It's been a little shaky from an overall defensive perspective on this whole team. I'm not worried about Petrie. Bad moment for him. He's had a bad few weeks from a tackling perspective. That guy's going to get it right. That guy's going to correct it. Putting him on the bench for Eric Murray for a moment felt like just, hey, calm down, relax, do what you're capable of doing, reset. It's kind of like when you're doing bad at a Super Nintendo game, you just hit reset. Okay, you don't even worry about using up your lives. It's like, oh, let's just start all over. It kind of felt like hitting reset on Petrie. Hit reset on him, then get him back out there, and it's like, okay, breathe easy, go in there. I'm not worried about Petrie, not at all.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think there's enough tangibles there, and I think tackling is technique and it can be fixed. They just need to fine him or something every time he leads with the shoulder, because it's not, get both hands, go low, and bring him to the ground. And, it's technique, because you're just trying to unbalance somebody more than anything else. But, yeah, and Christian Harris, it started to seem like at times the lights clicking on. He's still got some terrible run fits at times, and I don't know if that's picking up bad habits from Christian Kirksey. Cashman was out there a bit as well. Made some nice plays, but as you said, had a bad one as well. Hansen was out there as well at the start, so there was a bit of interest. No Garrett Wallow, or limited Garrett Wallow. I didn't certainly see him out there. I don't know if he's injured or something. I missed that. But it certainly seemed like they tried to rotate and do a little bit different at linebacker spot this week.
I'm fine putting whoever is fresh out there, because It doesn't seem the only person I want out there every time that they possibly can be out there is Christian Harris. He needs the reps. He needs the opportunities to improve. And for me, with Christian Harris, I'm watching the game until he proves me different. This is how I feel about Christian Harris. It's a lot like Nico Collins. If Christian Harris is your best linebacker, you might be in trouble. If Christian Harris is your second best linebacker, you might have a badass linebacking group. Because if they put a stud linebacker next to Christian Harris, like a really good linebacker with Christian Harris, that would be a really fearsome twosome. I just don't know how you go about finding that stud linebacker because those guys don't hit free agency. And there's so many other places that you need to spend picks that it'd be hard to go out there and focus heavily on, inside linebacker from a draft pick standpoint. But Harris is a fun watch. Yes, there's some question marks. And I wonder if a lot of the stuff from Harris is just, hey, he's got the game experience. He's going to work on it. The more input that he gets, the better his output's going to be. That's how I feel about Harris. And until he kind of proves me different, if he's the second best linebacker on the team, you might be going somewhere. If he's the best linebacker on the team, which it kind of feels like he is right now, you might be in trouble. So I don't want him to stay the best linebacker on the team unless he turns into an amazing linebacker.
Yeah. No, and I think, another week goes by and we don't really get a great evaluation of Derek Stingley because, as you said, they're in zone and you want to go and see him match up with some guys and battle it out and refine his technique in doing that, and being physical and not giving penalties away and all that kind of stuff. But he's been almost like they've kept the stabilisers on him a little bit, and I think that's maybe something you'd like them to look at. But again, that inflexibility, but I don't think they will.
Yeah, they had so many holes on this team after last season, and they've plugged a couple of them here or there. They have so many more holes this year heading into next year, and they got a lot of draft capital and they got a lot of money, so they'll be better equipped to fill everything. But there's only could I have made an argument that maybe you shouldn't have gone slot wide receiver and you shouldn't have traded a bunch of stuff to go get, to move around for Mechie and to move around for Harris and things like that. And should you have prioritized defensive end? Sure. Well, you still needed a slot receiver. I mean, Nick Cassera didn't know John Mechie was going to have the diagnosis and the health problems that he had. But could you have made an argument that you could have gone a bunch of different ways with all the picks? Yeah, absolutely. But if you don't go the way you did, then where are you addressing those holes? So there's so many different things that they need to go through. It's you have to bet on the guys that are in the building that are young, getting better and stepping up, because if you have to replace those guys, someone who you thought was plugging a hole, then you're really you're trying to backfill positions and things like that. You're not going to get any better overall everywhere else if you're always trying to just find the base for certain positions. That's the tough part about they have to have a lot of guys turn into good football players or they're going to be yet again working from behind a deficit.
Yeah. And in terms of the draft outlook and college game days and Saturdays, any guys that have caught your eye that you think people should be watching, keep an eye out for as the season, there's only got a couple of weeks left now, 3 or 4 weeks left to college before the playoffs. But any guys you got on your list?
Yeah, I just do not know. I do not know how Nick Caserio is going to use the other first round pick, the Browns pick. I have a hunch that it's going to be quarterback with the Texans selection. 1-1, especially if you get to 1-1 or 1-2. I have a hunch it's going to be quarterback. So Bryce Young, I watch Bryce every week. Most people watch Bama and they hate watch Bama every week. I watch Bama every week and I go, man, I wonder what Bryce Young would look like if he had a really good offensive mind coaching him. Because Bill O'Brien's coaching him now, and he looks pretty good every week. It's I wonder what would happen if a really good offensive mind coached Bryce Young. Bryce Young's the guy. That's who I would like for them to take with the number 1 overall pick right now. I understand why some people might enjoy C.J. Stroud's work a little bit more, but Young has a little bit more of an it factor. Yeah. He feels like a guy that's a little bit more mobile. So with that, Bryce Young's my guy at 1-1. With that, 8th, 9th pick, whatever it is right now, I do believe it eventually finds itself outside the top 10. Look, the big-time defensive linemen will likely be off the board by the time the Texans go to pick. So Georgia's Jalen Carter, the 2 Clemson guys that are really, really good, I believe those guys will be off the board by the time the Texans come around with that second selection. But I would definitely be thinking about wide receiver. Someone like Jackson Smith and Jigba could tick down a little bit because he hasn't played a ton of football this year. He's going to test really well, so maybe that's going to push him back up. Keishawn Butte from LSU, fantastic wide receiver. If you want to watch him, has probably not been utilized the exact same way that some of these previous LSU wide receivers have, but the guy is fantastic. He's very, very good. I would also, you're not going to find yourself in a lot of scenarios where you're watching a ton of like Boston College football, but Zay Flowers, who's on their team, is really good. Both the Tennessee guys are solid, and Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. Jordan Addison at USC. He came back and they scored a gazillion points and covered a huge number on Friday night against Colorado. So wide receiver is where I'd be paying attention to, mostly on the outside guys, because it feels like if Mechie comes back, Mechie's going to be that inside guy. So I'd be looking at a little some wide receiver help. I suppose if they moved far enough back with that other selection, they could think about the Notre Dame tight end, Michael Mayer. Really talented guy. He's going to be the first tight end off the board. But watch Georgia. And you're going to say, you can talk about the tight end in Georgia. Bowers, he's not draft eligible. Yeah, I know. I know Bowers isn't draft eligible. I want him drafted next year, not this year. He obviously can't come out. Darnell Washington is their other tight end. He's a monster. He's a massive human being. He's 6'7". He's listed at 270. He's damn near 300 pounds. He is a legit hybrid tight end, even though he's a massive person. He's not a blocker only. He can help. The conversation every time Georgia plays is, oh my God, look, they put 6 offensive linemen on the field. Nope. It's just their extra tight end who's a massive monster. That guy should be a really interesting draft prospect, top of the second. Maybe sneaks into the latter part of the first, depending on what team might take a chance on him. But he's a top 50 guy for sure. So I think about him from a tight end perspective. This is a tight end room that's a very weird tight end room. It's veteran heavy from the guys that are succeeding. The young guys aren't succeeding really well. And then just about anybody who is a defensive end, think about them, pay attention to them. And they're going to have to draft an edge rusher. My guy, Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech, that would be kind of an interesting one. You got to have some projection with him. The consistency is not totally there, but maybe some projection with him. He's a late first rounder. I do believe Caserio is going to use that other first round pick the same way he used it this past year, maneuvering around. Somebody wants to come up. He has, say, 5 guys on his board. He wants to move back 2 spots so he still gets a guy off his board and add some more draft picks just so he can also maneuver back into that first round if he needs to. Remember, the Jets did this last year, ended up with 3 first-round picks. Those guys have been pretty good. When you have a pick at the top of the second so high, it's very easy to move into the first round and end up with 3 first-round picks. And that becomes, you take less of the chance out if you're drafting a higher drafted guy. You take less chance that you're taking a risk with a lower drafted guy. So yeah. I would think those players, just pay attention to wide receiver, pay attention to end. And then, Darnell Washington, one of my favorite prospects in this draft. It's going to be fascinating to watch him in the draft process.
Do you think I do see the argument at times, and I think when you're in that 1-1 spot, like you've got to get the ultimate premium for it if you move out of it, but at the same time there's a premium in getting it, and you may never get another chance to get a quarterback if you are successful in improving in the way you want it. So I do kind of see the argument on both sides of the coin. You want to get, because it's hard to watch, and you want to get somebody that can actually play the quarterback position, but then you also think, well, is this the right setup for a young guy? Could you break him, like we said earlier? And if a team offers you a ransom to trade back, then it might be difficult to say no if the asking price is, at the premium, which it has been in previous years.
Man, the way I think about it, the way this franchise has had luck not go their way when they've ended up with the number 1 overall pick. I mean, when they end up with the first pick ever in their franchise's history, the quarterbacks to choose between are David Carr and Joey Harrington. Like, now they probably should have just taken Julius Peppers. Like, when they end up with the first pick the next time, Vince Young. I mean, Gary Kubiak didn't want Vince Young. And Vince turned out to be an okay pro initially, and then turned into a disaster. You know, the next time they have the number one pick, Jadeveon Clowney's the pick. I mean, they didn't want Blake Bortles. To have the number one pick and potentially have a quarterback that's worth drafting, it is something this franchise has basically never had in their history. So it feels very tough to now. The conversation gets interesting if, say, the number 2 team really wants somebody at number 1, and you're still getting one of the top 2 quarterbacks. I'm not in love with Stroud, but if you leave with that first pick, if you leave having made that first selection, and one of those guys is that guy in a quarterback, it's going to be real hard to take this organization seriously, and it's going to be real hard to sell hope for this organization unless you've done something else in free agency or from a trade perspective that gives you somebody really fun and interesting.
Yeah. And do you think they make a change at the coaching staff? Because if you are to align, is there any point keeping this current coaching staff quite clearly inefficient on both sides of the ball? Both guys calling the plays are tied to one another. Is there, if you're starting afresh, and we'll probably get an idea into that in the coaching cycle, hire change, if they are going to go a quarterback, because that could probably be the biggest indication. But do you think new coach, new quarterback, reset again for a second year in a row, is that feasible based on the conditions Lovie was hired upon?
It's going to be really easy to sell from a football perspective that Lovie Smith failed this year.
Yeah.
I mean, David Culley coached a 4-win football team. Lovie Smith may not coach a 4-win football team. Like that. Here's the thing. If you're going to do that, if you're going to move on from Lovie Smith, the last time a franchise did fire after 1 year was San Fran. It was Jim Tomsula. It was Chip Kelly. And then they went and got the offensive coordinator of the NFC champions in Kyle Shanahan. And Kyle had coached the team up on offense to the Super Bowl with Dan Quinn, and Kyle had turned Matt Ryan into an MVP candidate. It was a no-doubter. Everybody understood it. Everybody paid attention to it. If you're going to make the change, you have to get one of those no-doubters where everybody is on your side, where everybody feels like it makes a ton of sense. Josh McCown didn't make a ton of sense. Hines Ward, Lombardi's grandson, who runs the offense in LA for the Chargers, like those guys didn't make a ton of sense. Like ending up on Lovie Smith didn't make a ton of sense. If you're going to move on from a guy after a back-to-back, after 1 year, back-to-back times, it has to be the no-doubter where everybody's in your corner and everybody feels like you're making a great decision. There's not very many of those guys right now. The one that I feel like could emerge as one of those guys is DeMeco Ryans. Yeah. And obviously the extra conversation, the criticism for moving on from an African-American head coach would be mitigated if you're hiring an African-American head coach. It just so happens that if DeMeco ends up being the best candidate, okay. I don't care if you're purple, yellow, blue, green, pastel colors. If you're not a good coach, I don't want you coaching my football team. And if you are a good coach, I want you coaching my football team. So, I mean, I'm not blind to the conversations around the issues with minority candidates getting opportunities. I'm not numb to that. But at the same time, if Lovie Smith goes out here and coaches a football team worse than David Culley coached a football team, and the defense that he's in charge of takes a step back, and you want to move on from that guy, like from a football standpoint, that's a conversation that's worth having.
Yeah. No, I think so. And as I said, I think we'll get an indication of where they'll go with that top spot. It might be hunker down, run it back for another year, I fear. But certainly,
if they do that though, Lovie has to hire a defensive coordinator. Yeah. And they might need to do something different on offense with the offensive game.
Yeah, there'll need to be some sort of sacrificial lamb. It did go well, I think, in terms of the Browns coughing up 39 to the Dolphins. Carolina won, the Lions won, the Steelers won, all pushed them ahead of 3-win teams. But I suppose the concern and what could be the nail in the coffin, Corey, and I think they were about to, after this Washington game, we're about to hit a really tough stretch. And this team hasn't been blown out despite the way in which the games have gone. They perhaps should have been. But can you see, with the Dallas, Kansas City, Miami, and potentially the Browns at home, maybe could potentially be a nail in the coffin there if Watson comes back. But it feels like this team's overdue to be blown out. And I think if you start to stack them up in that really tough run of games, I think that could potentially change the viewpoint on if you make a change at coach again for a second consecutive year.
The Dolphins might hang 100 on this team. It's that's going to be a really tough game because the Dolphins have two really good running backs, and by the way, they have one of the best wide receiver duos in all of football. Look, I want them to win one more football game. I want them to spoil Deshaun Watson's debut as a Cleveland Brown, and then the rest of those feels like the game is going to go the way the game probably should go. I don't see how they're going to surprise anybody besides maybe the Commanders and the Jaguars on this schedule. The Titans know how to beat them. That's in Nashville. So it's a road game. We know how Davis Mills struggles on road games. The Cowboys should smoke them with their running back duo. The Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes can beat them. The Colts later in the year, Jonathan Taylor, that one's an easy scenario. Just beat the Browns. Nick Chubb and Hunt, fantastic, obviously. But beat the Browns. There's your 2 wins. Hope that the Raiders sneak one more out there so you've got the game cushion that win over the Browns doesn't hurt you a ton in the draft standings. And yeah, the Commanders game will tell us where this team is and where it's going to be, because you should be able to hang tough with the Commanders. They'll probably beat you, but you should be able to hang tough with them. If you can't hang tough with the Commanders, there's not a lot of teams left on your schedule you can't hang tough with.
Yeah. Yeah, it will be a test, that's for sure, and we'll find out. If this team is crumbling or can it emerge. But I think certainly this stretch of games from after Thanksgiving right through till Christmas Eve may change the viewpoint, and it may have a few people looking for new roles next year. But we'll see. It's not been tough, but thank you very much for your time, Cody, to come and join us to try and talk through a season, which is a slog for all concerned, but hopefully stuff like this lets you hang in there a little bit more.
Hey, if this thing turns into eventually, finally getting the quarterback who's going to stick around, who's that guy, and all those, we started this talking about the Astros. I remember those years with all those really bad Astros teams with players of the past that I can remember. Hopefully 4 or 5 years from now, we're sitting here having this conversation, talking about this, and we're like, well, remember when Christian Kirksey was the starting linebacker for this team? Well, remember when they had to play Kurt Hinish because they didn't have any depth on the defensive line? Remember when Blake Cashman couldn't make that tackle against Darius Slayton? Remember when O.J. Howard just wouldn't block the guy chasing Jordan Akins in the game against the Giants? Hopefully we'll have those conversations and we'll look back laughing about how those things led the Texans to eventually getting much better, like the Astros games or like the Astros teams of the early 2010s did.
Yeah, well, as I said to somebody who's a Green Bay fan, and now that they've come back against Dallas, so you can never. I mean, and I think, well, one thing, you never undervalue the good times because they go quick. But also you got to always remember, and the Giants were a great example of that. Things can change very quickly. It doesn't seem logical at this stage, but you got to hold that hope, I suppose.
The valleys let you know just how high the mountains are. And right now the Texans are in a valley climbing their way out, and we'll see how high their mountain gets. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening this week. Thanks to Cody for his time. Thanks for listening again this week to the Turn Up For What podcast. And we'll be back next week, hopefully, with at least a close, if not well-run game by the Houston Texans against the Washington Football Team Commanders, whatever the hell they're called these days. But we'll catch you again next week.